this episode of our Hello interview series. And our guest today is Marnie Dawson. Marnie is the owner of Dawson Relocation Services, which serves the Chicago metro area. Marnie's small but mighty team has helped seniors and their families with the organizing, downsizing, and move process since 2008. Marnie has been an active member of NASMM since day one, 15 years ago, and she currently serves as the chair of the NASMM Ethics Compliance Commission. That's a mouthful, and we lovingly and affectionately refer to it as the NECC within NASMM. So you'll hear that word a lot today, NECC, NECC, and it stands for the NASMM Ethics Compliance Commission. Just think ethics, all things ethics. And it's actually ethics and the NECC that brings Marnie here today. What exactly, Marnie, is the Ethics Compliance Commission? And give us a little background.
So the background begins with the Code of Ethics. NASMM is guided, and first, thank you, Mary Kay, for the nice introduction. But the Code of Ethics, there's a Code of Ethics that was put together in 2013 by the original NECC, and they put together this Code of Ethics with the goal to create a standard for the industry, for the senior and specialty move management industry. This Code of Ethics is kind of our guiding principle. It is what sets the values. It sets the standards for our organization and for the members and for the clients, so they know what to expect, and for the staff that work with everybody. Within that, the NECC is a group of people, of members who are dedicated members to NASMM, who are not here just who are here to kind of educate members and make sure that the members of NASMM understand the Code of Ethics, how it applies, how situations can be handled, all within the framework of the Code of Ethics. The other thing we do is we're here when there is a complaint made about a move manager. The NECC will come in and will listen to the complaint and try to understand what happened in the complaint and make a decision on how to help the move manager with the process through and kind of respond to the customer.
Sure.
I think that covers it.
Yeah, that covers it quite a bit. So we tout the NECC as a NASMM member benefit, but we also know it's obvious that it's a client benefit as well. Tell us about those two different perspectives and why each of them should consider the NECC a plus rather than any sort of minus in their move management experience.
Okay, so the easy answer is from a client perspective. From a client perspective, if you work with a move manager, you want to know that you're working with somebody who has some standards, who has some ethics behind them, who has some policies and procedures, and who has a contract and all these things. And those are outlined in our Code of Ethics. These are things that we have these principles that the Code of Ethics outlines, that we're going to follow the laws, that we're going to have contracts, that we're going to respect the client's privacy. And it gets down to a lot more details for that. So for the client, they know that when you choose to work with a NASMM member, you have somebody who will follow that Code of Ethics. So it's a benefit to know that there is that standard, and that if something does go wrong in a move or something isn't right, that there is a complaint process, and there is a place for the member to go, for the client to go, the customer to go to hear the complaint, and that there will be something done to a consequence, I guess, a sanction if there was truly a violation, and that hopefully we can make that move manager a better move manager for the future. That's sort of from the client and customer perspective. From the member perspective, having values, principles, standards to guide you helps you when you're creating your company, helps you to know how you can deal with situations, helps you to create policies and procedures and things that have a flow to them. And then it's sort of, from a kind of a marketing perspective, it's what sets us apart. It's what says we are here. We are somebody with ethics, with standards, with principles. As when folks are trying to pick who they want to work with.
Well, let's talk about that piece a little bit. I'm kind of glad you brought that up, because we know that there are just tons of people out there identifying themselves as senior relocation specialists, as move managers, sometimes senior move managers, which we know is not cool, since NASMM owns the service mark of that. We own the trademark of that. And so only NASMM members may actually call themselves that. But, they work around that by calling them all kinds of things in the orbit of move management. And yet they've chosen not to become a member of NASMM. I would think, and maybe I'm biased, as I surely am, that should be a red flag for consumers, because what it tells us is they don't want to have to get insurance. They don't want to have to abide by a predetermined code of ethics. They are entrepreneurs who are not seeking a professional community to belong to and to abide by certain rules. So what would you tell consumers about the role of the code of ethics in their decision-making to hire a senior move manager from NASMM?
I think that's what you just said was sort of the key, that we do have guidelines that if you work with us versus somebody who doesn't, I can show you what our guidelines are going to be, what our guiding principles are, how we are going to approach, even from the very first one, in advocacy and loyalty. The client is the person in transition, and I will provide services based on the person in transition. I mean, right there's our beginning and our guiding principle for our projects. So I think that just alone starts you off on the right foot for the project.
So funny that you bring that up, because that's on my list of questions to ask you. It's a little farther down, but let's just address it right here since you brought it up. That's a little bit, it's our very first tenet in the Code of Ethics, as you indicated, right out of the box. There it is. But it's also probably somewhat controversial, because we've gotten used to businesses large and small, East Coast to West Coast, whatever. The client is usually the person paying the bill, right? That's just how we have, that's
as a
society, as a culture, okay. That's what the norm is. So for NASMM to take a little bit of a left turn there and say, we believe the client is the person in transition. Why is that so important to everything NASMM stands for, and why should that be important to the consumer?
Because what we do is we go into people's lives, and we're going into somebody's home, and we're going into a world where we are helping people make some of the toughest decisions they're ever going to have to make in their lives, of what to keep, what to let go of, what to leave behind. And if our voice that we're supposed to be listening to is the voice over here from the daughter or the attorney or the guardian who brought us in, I mean, those can influence and be part of it, but this is such a high touch, high impact kind of situation. We have a relationship with that person, and to have that be what guides us, I mean, it's just sort of a good principle. I don't know if that's kind of how I feel.
Right, for sure, for sure. So tell us, how many members are there on the NEC?
So there are, how many? 5 of us on the NEC.
And that's been pretty much the standard for most of its 12
I
years.
believe so.
All right, so how are these people selected? They're not voted on by the membership. They're actually selected and appointed for terms, correct?
They are. So so there was an original group who helped to create the code of ethics and kind of guided us for a long period of time. And then at some point, transitions happen. So we do a recruitment period. I know there are certain criteria that need to be followed, and one is that they are an accredited company, and that they are senior move manager, certified senior move managers. That's sort of the minimum. But then we also look at their background and what they've done for the organization, as well as what they've done in their careers, and use that criteria to help pick the group. One of our members has been on the NEC since the very beginning, and it is great because she knows the history and the background of everything that's always been done. And then in, what was it, 2020, during the pandemic, we kind of switched out. So we switched out and gained some new members, and that's the group that's been together since then.
Great. Can you please walk us through a typical case and the overall process of handling a client complaint? But before you do that, I do want to make clear that you just don't get a ton of cases. I know as the co-executive director, we see what's happening with the NEC. We're apprised of your work, and it astounds us each day when we know that there are thousands of moves going on around the country every year, many thousands of moves now as our membership is growing. And yet each year you have a handful of cases, give or take a handful. Mm-hmm. And some years, there's more, and some years there's fewer. But overall, it is staggering. And before we talk about a typical case, I do want to say that we are so proud of the NASMM membership, that this continues with the growth of this field, that this continues to be a small number of complaints that consumers lodge against our senior move managers. And we'll talk a little bit more, maybe now or later, about how many of those are not necessarily ethics complaints, but are customer service complaints. And even that is a great opportunity for a dissatisfied client, the very occasional dissatisfied client, to have a place to air whatever dissatisfactions they have. And I do have to say it is a source of great pride for all of us within NASMM that this continues to be really a small issue. So that being said, and I kind of commend NASMM, us, you, all of NASMM, everyone on viewing this, that we are willing to say we are not perfect. We strive for perfection, but there will be times when we come short, we fall short. And I think it's important to state that we continue to strive for perfection. And fortunately, we have volunteer members like the NEC Commission who give an awful lot of time towards that goal of ultimate perfection and client satisfaction. So that being said, walk us through a typical case and how the NEC handles that case from start to finish, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah. So, like you said, most of a good portion of our complaints are, and this is sort of our most common complaint, is there might be an issue with the move. And the client just doesn't feel as if either the move manager did something to fix the problem, or they feel like they didn't respond to their complaints and their feelings about the move in a way that resolves it. So it really is a complaint about something, a move might have, something might have gotten damaged in a move, or something, the move grew in exponentially and they didn't feel that the move manager handled the situation properly, or something might have gone missing in a move and they just didn't feel that how it was resolved in a way that I guess resolution, I hate to use that word, but I just didn't feel it was handled properly. And so in that case, they would bring the complaint to us. And how we know is they probably email Jennifer and Mary Kay, or write or call, and then they're invited to complete. There's an online form where the person who's making the complaint will complete the form, and that information is then sent to the members of the NEC.
Can I stop you just right there?
Yeah.
Just 1 second. I think what you just said is very important, excuse me, to the overall topic here, that they do have to complete the online form. A phone call to alert us that the online form is coming is okay, but we will not accept the contents of the complaint through a phone call, through an email, that the consumer must provide backup information, whether it's emails, text messages, whatever, for the complaint to actually be executed by the NEC. So,
Right.
and you could talk a little bit about that, but we've done that because what happens is over the, in the early years of NASMM, when a client couldn't find something that they had told the senior move manager to pack or to give to Goodwill, and suddenly they're in their new assisted living apartment and it's 3 days later and they can't find it. They thought they told the senior move manager to put it in the top drawer of the nightstand, when they actually told the senior move manager to take it to Goodwill, whatever it is. So once we started mandating that complaints come through an online process and did require evidence, we found that they dropped considerably, because as people started investigating their own complaints, right, to bring to the NEC, they actually resolved their own complaints because they found what they were looking for, or they read more closely an email that a move manager might have sent them, right? So once there was this requirement that they do a little research to elevate the complaint to the NEC's attention, that so many of these smaller complaints just resolved organically because the older adult and the family member started investigating them on their own. Would you say that's correct?
I believe so. That was before my time, but I believe so. I believe
Yes.
that is true.
Because the first impulse is to just call NASMM and to just go on and on about what the issue is. And certainly, that's okay, but it does not elevate at that point, right? It's just a phone call.
Right.
Between,
and that's right. That's not
Yeah.
an ethical complaint. That is just
phone
something
call,
went wrong,
right?
and it's just trying. But I do think the form that we have is amazing, because they can add documentation, they can add copies of their contract, they can add a narrative, they can outline the complaint. So it provides a place for somebody who has had a bad situation, something that hasn't gone right, to have a good place to incorporate all the information for the members. I mean, for the NEC to review.
Terrific. Sorry, let's go back to what you're talking about. I just wanted to take a little turn there.
You're good. We all go down.
What happens next after
so
you
we
receive the complaint?
So we receive the complaint. We look through the complaint and we try to kind of put it together. We then draft a letter 2 letters. We draft a letter to the member who the complaint has been filed against, and we express what the complaint states. And at the time where we request information from that NASMM member, we want to know, we want to see things like the contract, we want to see the proposal, we want to see we'd like them to write a narrative telling us what their experience was. We've received text messages, photographs, emails, anything that can help to provide us the picture of the job. We also send a letter to the person making the complaint, acknowledging that we received the complaint, that this is our process, and that if they have any other information, they're welcome to share it. We give a couple weeks for that information to come through, and then once we have all the information from both parties, thank goodness for Zoom, we sit down on Zoom, and the members of the NEC review all of the information together, and both sides, we often talk to each other and say there's 3 sides to every story: the side, the client, the move manager, and then what the truth is, which is usually somewhere in the middle, and we try to figure all that out. We look at it through the lens of the Code of Ethics, which happens to live on my desk all the time, every day. And we also look through it through business practices, through the lens of business practices. Are good business practice? I mean, because all of us are members of, all of us are accredited members. We understand the kinds of the things that are needed to create a good, strong business. So we look through to see all of those things, and then we come up with a ruling or a decision. Or was there an ethics violation? Were there bad businesses practices? Was this just a miscommunication between 2 people? What truly happened here? And then based on that, if we do find there were some violations, we might either put some sanctions out there, require some continuing education, or changes to contracts, amendments to contracts, or other things to help create better business practices. And we'll make those recommendations to the member. And then after all that's done, we also communicate to both the member and the person making the complaint the decision.
What is your experience with the resolution? Would you say clients are generally quite satisfied with their experience at the NEC, and that they feel that the resolution is fair and they're satisfied then?
I think so. I think most of the people, if we've done our job, we're showing them why we made a decision and what we saw, and kind of hoping. Now, there's always people out there that aren't happy. I mean, if we find that the move manager didn't do anything wrong, then unfortunately that customer is still going to feel like they haven't had their voice heard. And unfortunately that does happen sometimes, but the majority of the time, knowing that you were heard and listened to, and that somebody took this seriously, helps to create a resolution.
Would you say most clients submit the complaint form online? Most are the older adults themselves or adult children?
Most of the time it's the client themselves who is submitting the piece, the complaint.
Okay, well, that's good. Just because they're on the front lines there. I know in the past we've had some cases where the violation was really not an ethics violation at all. It was an adult child who swooped in at the last minute and really didn't know the parameters of the agreement,
Exactly,
right?
right.
Yeah, and that will happen. And that's why it's great for the NEC to sort all that out. So everyone's on the same page.
And that's something to say that we come into this trying to be neutral. We look at the complaint and we try to look at all of the information and try to find out, like I said, what the truth was in the middle. So we start from a neutral place to 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 hopefully make sure everybody is heard on that move and the complaint.
That's excellent. And I think we should bring up the fact that we said that there were 5 members on the NEC representing likely over 100 years of move management experience, my guess. I know most of them are 15 to 20 years in business, so 75 to 100 years. So they've seen a thing or two, right? So they know an ethics violation versus maybe a poor customer service choice when they see it. And so that's just an excellent way of sorting through what's real here and what is a customer service issue that can be cleared up way more easily, right, than an ethics file. So we're using
and
the term ethics
sometimes
broadly.
oh, sorry, I apologize.
No, go ahead.
And sometimes that is what our recommendations are, is how to resolve that customer service issue. So it might not be they violated the code of ethics. It might just be, this is how you can make this situation a little better for everybody.
Right. So some of the things that come to mind about things that people might submit this online form about, tell us, for example, what a typical conflict of interest might look like. Sometimes those are not as obvious. They're a little more in the shadows. What would a typical conflict of interest possibly be? And I'm not saying this is happening. I'm just saying where would be a red flag on a conflict of interest case?
So the red flag might be where that's a good one.
Well, let me just say, the one that comes to mind is, Mrs. Jones has an incredible collection of Hummel figurines or Yadro or whatever, right? And she's telling the senior move manager where she would like certain pieces to go. And one of the people on your staff, is packing them up, and Mrs. Jones is right there, and she kind of holds one particular one. Let's just say it's the Balloon Lady by Hummel, okay? And she holds it a little bit more lovingly, and she starts to tell the client that her mom used to have this, but no one can find it. Her mom passed away 10 years ago. She's not sure where it went. It probably got broken by her mom 30 years ago, whatever. But she says it really touches her. And so Mrs. Jones says to Pat, the senior move manager on that particular job, you take that. I want you to have it. Tell us the way that Pat should react. Tell us what is considered the standard of excellence for that reaction.
Well, the standard of excellence for that reaction would actually be defined by the company's policy. And the code of ethics says that we will have a written policy for regard for accepting gifts. Now, within this industry, it's sort of accepting gifts is something we kind of discourage, because you never know why somebody's making that choice, or the value of an item, or who else it was supposed to go to, and you don't want to be in the way of a family gift. So there should be a policy within a company that states clearly what you do if you're handed a gift, and if you've done a good job as a move manager training your staff will know how to respond to that. And no, thank you, Mrs. Smith, I really appreciate that offer. But it's been such an honor to get to hold this piece and have that memory myself today. Thank you, is a good way for that to be handled.
So NASMM doesn't really get into the nitty gritty of that, we just want to make sure that our company members have a stated policy so that the client can refer to that if necessary.
Exactly.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about confidentiality in senior move management. I imagine as senior move managers, you are in the most private spaces of a person's long life, right? So more than sometimes spouses, sometimes there's some hidden parts of the home that the spouse doesn't know about, certainly than the adult children, because we're not poking around our older parents' homes in their private drawers and cabinets. So tell us about the move manager's role in confidentiality and how that impacts ethics.
So, I mean, it's actually pretty straightforward and pretty simple. It's that we respect the client's privacy and we won't reveal information about the clients, which is a pretty simple, straightforward sentence. It gets hard because sometimes there are things that are dangerous or unsafe environments, or things that might affect public safety, or if you have somebody who is living in very unclean conditions, there are things that do impact kind of that line of what do you do? How do you handle this? And those cases we do have an exception for, and we are allowed to talk to authorities or other people about this, about that issue. But in general, it's a pretty straightforward, this is the client and it's their privacy. And I know for my team, I have a whole policy for my staff on even how to talk, when we can talk about something that's happening with a client. Like, we're not allowed to talk about another client on in another client's home. There are places and times where you can discuss what's even just what you saw and what you worked with. So keeping that client's privacy is kind of an utmost piece of it all.
So we know that senior move managers often have other partners in their jobs. They may have estate planning, estate sale companies. They have certainly moving companies most of the time. They can have junk haulers, you name it. I know your Rolodex is a mile long, Marnie, and everyone else is within NASMM too.
I'm in Chicago. I know a guy, is what
Yeah,
I always end up
right.
saying.
Right. But how does a senior move manager investigate the ethics of a partner that they are sort of a general contractor for, if you will? I think a lot of people who may not understand senior move management, when we talk to them about the senior move manager is the general contractor, and then instead of hiring out electricians and carpenters and drywallers, you're hiring out moving companies and estate companies and things like that. So very similar.
Right. And that's first off, a lot of times we don't hire those people. We do some research and we vet. We get to know those companies and we can make recommendations to our clients about those. But in the end, we share that information with the clients, and they are the ones kind of making that final decision on who they're going to use. But because we don't want to hire those on their behalf, we want to make sure they're involved in that decision-making process. But it does require going out there, getting to know the vendors, spending time. I mean, that's part of my, not just working with clients, but part of my job is just making sure the people I encourage to walk into somebody's home are going to treat the clients with respect, are going to follow as much of the code of ethics that applies to them. I want people who have that similar standards and values that they bring to my clients. And that's kind of the best way to go about doing that.
That makes total sense. The other thing is what you said, I want to pull out a little bit here, is that you do not hire those people. That's kind of where the comparison between a general contractor and a move manager is different, because often if we're putting an addition on our house or building a new house or whatever, we're getting one bill from the general contractor, and he's hiring the carpenters, the drywallers, the electricians, right? So there is a distinction there. Let's talk a little bit about how some move managers might hire them. It's not always so. And let's talk just for a minute, because that begs another question. So you said at the beginning, and I think it makes a lot of sense, that the NASMM Ethics Compliance Commission and the NASMM Code of Ethics are guiding principles for excellence in move management, right? But that doesn't mean we tell people how to run their businesses. We have over 1,000 members, right? And
Exactly.
we probably have 950 different ways of doing things. So,
Well, and to that point, a lot of our codes are, I will have a policy in regards to this. I will have a policy in regards. So we're not, there are some things that dictate how things run, such as the client is the person in transition piece, but others are about creating policies and just having a clearly stated policy.
right. And so when you're talking about picking your partners, you generally have, while you might have a big Rolodex, you generally shrink that to a pretty intimate group of partners, right? People that you know share the same integrity, the same code of ethics that your company has. And so you would recommend that to all senior move managers, I assume.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You want to do your homework. You want to make sure that the people that are coming to the door, I mean, even if you don't hire them, they still are representations of you.
Absolutely. And I think it's really one of the key benefits of hiring a senior move manager. While there are many, one of them is your reach to other members in the business community who will be part of that same job, that you have already pre-vetted them for the client rather than the client. Let's be honest, if Mr. and Mrs. Jones haven't moved in 40 years, they have no idea who the key players in their local area are, who are the best. You know, they can go on a Facebook group or whatever and find some recommendations, but there's nothing like the move manager, him or herself, who's conducted 50, 75, 100, 200, 300 moves with that same moving company, right?
I know that the other day I had a client talk to me about 20 years ago when we moved, we used this particular company. And unfortunately, it wasn't a company that I would recommend in today. And I said, well, things change over 20 years. And this is what I would recommend this company instead for these reasons. So you're right. That's a big part of, we bring these trusted partners with us.
So what would you say is one, if you can give us one or two of the most challenging ethics violations that have come before your neck during your tenure?
So I was thinking about that and thinking about what makes it, some of what becomes and what makes it challenging is actually not when it's an outside person, but when it's actually another move manager against another move manager. And we've had a couple of those come, and those are very challenging because you want to, we're all NASMM members and we want to make sure that nobody is violating that code. So those have been to kind of go into that deep dive of trying to understand what was going on between these two companies, and figure out, was there an ethics violation? That actually, to me, is some of the more challenging pieces of it.
That's
The
interesting.
other, yeah, to me, because I understand, I guess maybe because of who I am and what that I am a move manager in my day-to-day, everyday activity. I understand when a client comes and expresses that this particular thing happened on the move and it didn't feel right. And so kind of, I can understand their perspective because I've done literally thousands of moves. So I can understand how they viewed a move that way. But it's never easy to look through all of the information and try to, I'm trying to think of, I didn't want to point out particular move managers, but mostly it has to do with something got damaged, or let's say a move started here and the job would just keep growing, whether the client didn't quite understand the sorting process, um, or the things got delayed with the new place that they're moving into, and just the jobs just grow. And that's where it gets complicated and hard for people.
Well, I understand that because they signed a contract based on estimate A. And then
Correct.
the final bill comes in at maybe $1,000 or $2,000 more. But once, you know, from what I've observed in 17 years with NASMM is, generally speaking, once you walk the client through all those additional tasks that were achieved that were not part of that initial estimate, generally it's just a sort of a benign misunderstanding, and that can be resolved pretty quickly, because
Right.
we do want our move managers to be extremely transparent about cost.
Well,
And
one of the things that I thought about in preparing for this today was the things that kind of matter that help to prevent complaints that I think that move managers, and one is that kind of documentation of what happened so that they understand why the hours were there and what happened for that. And the other piece is good communication with the client, making sure your expectations and their expectations are out there mapped. And that helps to prevent that conversation.
what role would you say some early stage dementia, where it's kind of fluid, it's not 100% all the time, and some family members are tuned into it and others are not? It's those early days of perhaps even before an official diagnosis by a physician. What role does that sometimes play in the confusion on the part of the client in a complaint process?
That that can be a huge part, because unfortunately they don't always remember what was said. They don't always, you can go in and have something be one way one day and have something need to be a different way the next day. Dementia can play an interesting part in this process. So the best way to sort of handle that is to make sure you are documenting and taking notes. And at the end of the day, a lot of us use different software so that you can have daily notes about a particular what happened. And it's good to kind of track that. It's also good to create things that you leave with your clients to help, so that they know this is what we did today, this is what we're going to do tomorrow, kind of thing, to help keep those, to try to mitigate the confusion and to have things be more clear. The more you can prevent, the better. Is the best way to prevent. Proactive to prevent, I guess, would be the best way to phrase that.
All right, so we're kind of closing in because we do want to give our attendees a chance to ask you some questions. But one thing that comes to mind is you have a good amount of longevity on the NASMM Ethics Compliance Commission. Give us just a little bit of your perspective of where you've been with this and where you think it's heading. What's the future for ethics within NASMM, and where, from the day you started to now, what are some of the things you're most proud of? What are some of the things you feel like the NEC still has some work to do, or NASMM still has some work to do? And again, we're being really transparent and honest here. So I hope that's okay to ask you that.
Yeah, to me, the fact that I remember, I've been around a long time. I remember when this particular code of ethics was being created and the work that was done to put it together. And it is an incredibly comprehensive code of ethics. So watching that, and then having the chance to, because I sat on the NEC for a good a good 2 years before I became, I think 2 years before Margaret, who helped to create it, left, and then asked me, and you guys asked me to be the chair of this. So watching that has been kind of the cornerstone, is that beginning, and having that strong foundation that hasn't needed too much change. I think one of the things that we talk about as part of the NEC is that the next phase might be to kind of take this and develop more things that focus on employees and staff, and making sure we have trainings for staff. Part of what we spend a lot of time doing, and you'll see me, not to plug myself, in October, but and then at other times, is we do a lot of education and trying to make sure there are courses and classes out there that touch upon this code of ethics, and talk about business practices. And I know for you, when you're creating the content for the conference every year, the code of ethics is part of all of the things that we're educational opportunities we're trying to bring to the forefront. So to me, that's just something I'm very proud of.
Excellent. And we do think the NASMM Code of Ethics and the adherence to it is what makes NASMM the gold standard in management, for sure. Because we do know, as I said at the very beginning, there are lots and lots of people out there doing this who should not be. They do not want to adhere by a code of ethics. And it is the Wild West out there. Consumers have to be aware of who they're hiring and where they're coming from, what the background is, and hopefully they go to the NASMM website and check out what we're about.